So there's one little thing I thought would be fun, and then I've got something totally different. I'm going to try a different presentation system today, and I just want to see how it goes for you guys. If it's a little bit more seamless, we're going to try and do more of a PowerPoint style thing, so you have better visuals, and we can work off that a little bit more and add a little bit more context. We'll see how that goes. From an interesting just client experience side note that I'd love to share with you guys as a personal experience is that I find that in our world, at least in my world, I've been doing things so long with so many people, and I've got so many people that come in who are struggling with pain, struggling with issues, and they basically will give me full amnesty to do whatever I do with exercise to help support their body and improve their quality of strength, which is fantastic. Um, Most recently, I had somebody come in who was a younger athlete, and she's a CrossFitter, and she basically said, "Hey, I've been getting hurt doing CrossFit. I want to get stronger and I want to keep doing the things that I love to do, but I want to make sure that I can keep exercising pain-free, as your messaging says, for as long as I can." And so that made perfect sense to me. I was super excited. I don't get too many young, fit people nowadays, but she really kind of searched me out and wanted to come see me. So I went through my system and I started doing stuff, and I started using some of the machines as I've shown you guys, and she hated it. She was getting great results. She was feeling better, but she hated the machine. She hated the idea of being on a restricted thing because she's come from that CrossFit performance world. The switch over from her going from doing barbell, as many reps as you can, high intensity anaerobic circuits, to going onto a machine, regardless of the intensity I could create, she hated that experience. And so we sat down and we quickly chat about that. And so my entire approach has shifted now that I am using barbells and dumbbells and CrossFit-esque style exercises and scenarios to achieve the same goal. So it's the same kind of training that she was doing before, with my injection of specific adaptations that we need in specific and weird unique exercises. But as long as I can incorporate what I need to make happen with a barbell, a dumbbell, or a kettlebell, or the ski erg, she's satisfied. And at the moment, we're still getting great results. And so I like, it's not so much I'm trying to say, hey, here's a great thing I did. It's more of that we do have people that come in who, like Michelle, you might have this, and Rich, you might have this, right? Rich, you might have a football guy. Michelle, you might have a Pilates person. And they come into your world and they want to get specific changes. They want to get that shoulder fixed like Rich is trying to. And if you start taking them down a road of exercise that smells of too much, that's different from what they're accustomed to, you may have a bad experience. And so this is one of the reasons why I think creativity as a pillar is such a powerful thing, because we can all figure out the perfect system to improve someone's quality of health. But if they hate it, if we take a sidestep to pick means that they enjoy, but achieves the same result, maybe it's just a little slower going, and we can be open about that, I think that's fantastic. And I've seen many of you posting more things. I love that, and super excited to see more of that coming up, which is cool. All right. So, hey, do me a favor today. I'm going to do this new thing. I'm going to try something a little bit different. I want to know, as I'm going through this, do you like it? Do you not like it? If it works for you, let me know. We're just going to jump in, so I'm not blabbing on for too long. Oh, move that out of the way and play. Cool. So, cool. What we're going to do is we're going to go through a chest press analysis. Some of this, because we did this about 6 months ago, some of this will be review for some of you. And for some of you, this will be, there'll be some new stuff in here. And as we're going through this, I want to take kind of, cursor. I want to take, kind of common exercise images of people pressing and common scenarios like a barbell bench press, and try to explore the mechanics of it and see, what about this kind of exercise works? What about this exercise doesn't work from an objective perspective? Of course, as you guys know, the reason why I talk about the barbell bench press so much is it's kind of one of the big three. It's an exercise that is talked often about and explored about. And frankly, it was so funny. If I Google search barbell bench press, the number of images and different things that pop up is absolutely insane, as you can imagine. So this image here of this particular gentleman was one of the best top-down views that I can find. So we're going to come back to this image in a few slides to add some force vectors on here and talk about anatomy. What we're going to do is we're going to do a very basic, maybe expansive, I would say basic anatomy review, a little bit of mechanics mechanics review, talking about some of the joint complexes that are involved in the systems and they're connected. And we'll talk a little bit about the function of the muscles. And then for as adaptations go, all the exercises we're going to talk about will be with 3 specific hats. And I would say they're the hats that I focus on mostly with my clients. Actually, there's probably 4, but we're going to talk about how we can use a chest press to help improve function as an adaptation, how we can use chest press to improve what I'll say function-based strength. And the reason why I'm going to make that differentiation is, as you guys know, powerlifting and strength training with bench press, there are a lot of really great resources to move the most literal amount of pounds possible. I am not going to focus on having how much weight somebody can move. I am not a powerlifting coach. There's things about that world that I understand, but what I want to talk about is what kind of mechanical things that we can do that's going to have the least risk and the most benefit for an individual if they want to pick up heavier weights, or third goal, if they want to talk about hypertrophy. So I will say that there will be things that will come up within, I'll reference some cues that come up in powerlifting land, but I'm not going to be talking about powerlifting exclusively. I want to talk about chest press to help with function of the shoulder, chest press for function-based strength, and then hypertrophy. So when we get into this system, there is obviously, we're working with what's called the shoulder. And in most cases, if you guys have explored this before, you guys will know there is no such thing. And if someone has not heard this before, please interrupt me. There is literally no such thing as the shoulder joint. The joint is actually a shoulder complex made up of many joint systems. There are actually 4 that we're going to be focusing on, and Kapanji's manual on biomechanics will actually talk about how there is a 5th one, but I'm not going to focus on that because it's a very nuanced joint and it's kind of just weird. It's this acromion coracoid ligament thing. So as far as the joint systems go, we have the sternoclavicular joint, which is great because we have the sternum and the clavicle, which helps to make up the sternoclavicular joint. Most of the shoulder complex joint systems, actually all of them, are based off of the anatomical structures they're touching. So that makes it help for name jargon differentiation. So we have sternoclavicular joint. We then have the acromioclavicular joint. And you guessed it, we got the acromion right here and the clavicle that attaches to it. Below that, we have what everyone calls the shoulder complex, which is the glenohumeral joint, right? So the bone here is the humerus. And then this little circular fossa thing right here, right? It's called the glenoid fossa. And if you look up some other better anatomy photos, you can envision the glenoid being like a golf tee and the top of the humerus, the head of the humerus being a golf ball on that. And then what's not really dictated super well here, where's my little menu? Gosh, it's gone. Sorry. There it is. In the back here, if I'm going to annotate, boop, boop, boop. If we look just back here where we can't see, we have the scapula on the rib cage, and they call that the scapular thoracic joint. So this joint back here is actually not quite a joint, because if we think of these 3 as traditional joint systems, synovial joints, which have hyaline cartilage and synovial fluid and all the other bits and bobs, all of them have these 2 bony structural bits that connect and have all these things in between to help with managing force, and then synovial fluid to create a low friction, decrease the coefficient of friction. On the back, the scapula is sliding on the rib cage, much more like a sliding joint. It's kind of like the mouse I'm using right now sliding on the table. And so it's a much more fibrocartilaginous joint where we've got muscle and some other connective tissue that helps to support this. And so this is where you'll see in a moment the sliding of the scapula on the rib cage. I'm actually going to skip a slide here because I'm going to come back to it. Oh gosh, excuse me, there we go. Actually, no, we won't. We'll stay right here. So before we get deeper into the shoulder mechanics past these joints, of course, we're talking about chest press. So I want to just really briefly touch on anatomy, and then we're going to double back to this slide and talk a lot more about the function of these muscles, because one of the reasons why I keep referencing chest presses and rows as being such powerful shoulder exercises is in reality, it's weird, right? In bodybuilding land, we have this differentiation between chest day, back day, shoulder day, and they're very common kind of colloquial approaches to building fitness programs. And in fact, most people who do a program and start going to the gym This is kind of like one of the few exercise programs they do: leg day, arm day, shoulder day, chest day, back day. And that's fine. In reality, what ends up happening though, especially on the chest and shoulder day, is most shoulder days and most chest days do a lot of the same muscles. So today we're going to be talking about more traditional, like a 90-degree shoulder flex sagittal plane / horizontally abducted chest press. But as we start getting to an incline press, we're going to start seeing an immense amount of transfer between a traditional shoulder press and the anterior deltoid involvement, and then the clavicular pec involvement. If this image is kind of new for you, looking at some of this anatomy, there's a few things that I want to quickly point out. If you take any of the shoulder complex books and you look at chest, we have, and this is a few other, we have a few other programs that will actually help to differentiate divisions of chest. And so I'm going to try to do my best to draw them here. And what's actually nice, if I just undo this, you can see what's really nice about this chest model that I like is you can see all these lines that are kind of going to one common thread, if you will. And so I'm sure most of you know this, but all these lines are called striations. And why I like these lines, I love these lines, and this is where Thomas Myers and a bunch of other guys like anatomy trains, Thomas Myers, but other people will hang their hat on this, is because these lines are clear indicators of direction of force production. And so if we thought about this in a really oversimplified way, when I've talked about resultants, if I just take these two blue lines and I think about them being arrows, right? I mean, this is kind of like, forgetting about the chest underneath there, this is kind of your traditional slingshot, isn't it? Where you've got two different ropes, you got a little stone back here, and when you pull this slingshot back, it shoots a stone this way, all the way across the room if you've produced an equal amount of force on both sides and the elastics are the same consistency, and so on and so forth. The direction that the stone travels is called a resultant, and it's really the combination of two different force vectors producing force. Again, I'm sure for some of you this is review, and for some of you this might be new, which is super exciting, and I love sharing this with you. So with both of these two different force vectors, if we just take this very overgeneralized approach, we can get a sense of which direction the stone's going to go. And you probably could imagine that if I undid this, boop, 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 and I had a weird shaped, if I had a different shape to the slingshot, right, the exact same thing, right, exact same elastics, and I had this kind of a long slingshot going on, right, well, what's going to end up happening is if these are the same elastic quality, and I'm yanking on this one so much more to pull it back, you probably could imagine, and if anyone doesn't, this is confusing, please let me know. Like, please just send a quick voice note. If I got this short force vector here and this longer one, you probably could imagine that the stone is going to get blasted off closer to the force vector that's producing more force. It's going to have a lot more force, a lot more power, and it's going to actually help to skew the resultant over this direction. And this is where, going back to old school math class in elementary school, is where we get to the world of creating something called the parallelogram. And so if I make these lines and I make them parallel, I can get a sense of this is a more true indicator of which direction the stone and or force is going to go. So if you are a math, I mean, I am not a math person, I'll tell you that for sure. But if you remember parallelograms and resultants from elementary school, I would definitely suggest reviewing those when you're getting into anatomy studying, because as you guys can imagine, we've got like a big muscle here, like the obliques, that has got this huge amount of space it takes, a lot of real estate. You can probably imagine understanding those force vectors will help you to understand which direction the thing is producing force, depending on which end is heavy. So I would urge you to look into that a little bit more. And if you'd like me to do a study group on that, we absolutely can. Now, coming back to pec anatomy, this pec anatomy I think is really interesting, because if we're talking about improving shoulder function through the pec and chest for whatever limited, biased reason, I think it helps when we're thinking about those resultants to understand the different divisions of pectoralis major that are broken up anatomically in most books. And so this first division up here is called the clavicular portion of pec major. And it's really nice and simple to think of it that way, like why they say that, because if you look, we've got all these attachments that go from here to here and then down. And in some cases, you can actually find anatomy models where it actually goes down all the way to here, right? So in your traditional anatomical wording, this is the origin. And then you can see if we look at the insertion, based off what we can see here, we've got this very small point of attachment of where this whole thing inserts. Now, to be frank, this thing does have a much larger insertion than the point we're able to see here. It attaches to approximately to the top 1/3 superior aspect of the humerus. So we've got a much larger point of attachment, but for the sake of this exercise, we're going to stick to this specific attachment just to use it as a very singular and easy reference point. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly kind of draw the force vector. Like I'm going to try to outline each division of the pec. And we're just going to talk about the direction that it would produce force based off of the parallelogram, so to speak, that it would create. So the clavicular portion of chest attaches to this upper portion of the humerus. And as you can see, it attaches all the way out in this model to the distal aspect of the clavicle. That's subject to change depending on the individual. Some people it's more over here. Some people it's over here. We're going to go with this model because it's what we got. And then the other portion goes all the way to the most proximal, close to the center portion of the clavicle that you guys can see right here. And so if we were to look at trying to improve the muscularity of this muscle, at least from this neutral arm position, which will become a thing that we'll talk about when we get back to the chest anatomy, because the chest position does matter. That was not straight. But as you guys can imagine, we're going to end up having this resultant that's kind of in between here. Not exactly true, but just for visual sake, this will make it the easiest way. Actually, can I do these arrows again? Yes, I can. Fantastic. There we go. So we're going to have a force vector that sort of looks like this for the clavicular pec. If I choose a different color, I'm going to start now. This might get a little muddy, and I'll try my best to make it not. Now, if we go to the sternoclavicular division of pec major, so we've got clavicular division attached to the clavicle, the sternal division, not sternal division, pardon me. Sternal division is basically everything that goes from the sternum to this attachment site and down to the most distal end of the sternum. So we get this nice big line here, and this is, I think, the direction that most people envision chest pec major when they're thinking about force production. And so if we look at these divisions here, we can see that there's a nice resultant kind of coming across here. Now, as you guys could probably imagine, just between these two arrows, just between these two things, if we look at the size and girth of clavicular pec versus sternoclavicular pec based off of this model, you probably could imagine that the sternoclavicular pec is going to have a lot more force production capability than the clavicular division. And when we talk about orientation of the arm, that might change things a little bit. But more the reason why I would say that is you guys can see, I mean, in this little model here, we have a very small attachment site. Clavicular pec is not that large. It is quite literally just the length of the clavicle and ends up actually being smaller. And then the sternal division is much larger and broader. So we have in this attachment site, this part of the origin, much more muscle. We're going to take a quick step down and we're going to go to the costal division of pec. And this model does not do a great job of indicating that because costal division is actually pretty huge, right? So costal division is attaching to rib 6 or 7. It could be rib 5, depending on the individual. And in this model, you guys can see that it's got kind of like this model has that rounded belly that is kind of like the stereotypical chasing chest hypertrophy for a male. This kind of bottom end here. In reality, this thing, if you look up, can come down and attach all the way to rib 8 or 9 sometimes. So I'm just going to overshoot this just so you guys can kind of see, because what's really interesting about this is, and I would urge you, if you have not done this, Joe DeAntonis is an awesome instructor in Pittsburgh who does cadaver anatomy. I would urge you. Did you come with me to that? You suck, Taylor. Come on, man up. I know. If you have a chance, I would urge you to do cadaver anatomy and have a look at this. Like, don't pretend to take my word for it. I would even look up on Google some anatomy of this, because you'll see, like, one, the bottom division of pec is huge. Second, if you look at the orientation of this green line and you look at the obliques here, it's really interesting to see how the pec actually pretty well interdigitates into the top divisions of abdominis rectus, your abs, and your obliques. And if you really want to experience this, instead of just hearing me say, hey, your chest is a part of your abdominal midsection, two things. I mean, try to flex your chest as hard as you can the next time you go to do crunches. Flex your chest as hard as you can the next time you're trying to do some respiratory exercises. And you want to feel something really weird, flex your chest, blow all the air out of your lungs, and then try and do a crunch and feel how much your chest muscles actually get pretty tight if you do it with some discipline. So this gets pretty crazy, because if we just look at these yellow arrows, we have these 3 different conglomerates of resultants from each division of pec, which gives us an indicator as to when someone is taking a quote unquote more biomechanical approach to designing a hypertrophy exercise or division focused hypertrophy exercise for chest muscles. You can kind of see how they get there, right? This is one of the things that I've been talking to Kasim Hansen at N1 quite about, is that this is what he's basing these force vectors, or what he's basing a lot of his decisions on, coming up with unique, one of the factors when he's designing hypertrophy exercises for these muscles. And he's got some really cool approaches and ways of thinking of things, a little different than the way we've learned, but he's got some unique ideas. The thing that I would, let's see if I can clear this all. But here, before I jump ahead, we're going to do another thing on this chart here. Before I move forward, and I'm sorry, for some reason I can't see you guys. Did I do something wrong here? Can I see you guys? No. Does anyone have any questions about this? Is there anything that I can add some more information on before I jump to the next part here? Oh, we got chat.
Not
all
for me.
Good. Okay, cool.
So the reason that the lines don't show up on the TV, I don't know if that's normal. I'm assuming.
Oh, it's because I'm drawing on the preview PowerPoint.
Oh,
Sorry, guys. My menus are all getting in the way. Get that there. All good. Gosh. Sorry, guys. 1 second. Small technical error. Clear. All drawings. Clear. Mouse. There we go. Okay, good. So what we're going to do is we're going to stack one more thing on top of this. Oh, you guys are seeing my, that's why. You guys are seeing the drawings here. That's why. So if we take that exact same concept and we stack a little more on top of this, what I want to try and just show you guys is kind of like this aggregate resultant that we end up getting based off of what we just talked about. So if we have this clavicular pec division, and I'm making obviously a big generalization, kind of going this way, we have pec major coming across from that same insertion coming to the middle aspect of the sternum. And then we have another force vector that's kind of going in between the costal division of the pectoralis major. You guys can see that these lines all together kind of give us an indicator if this one muscle, we were going to try and do something to bias the total force production of this muscle, it would end up being somewhere in the middle here. Let's see if I can undo this here. It would be somewhere kind of similar to the sternum division, but somewhere across here with a slight decline, just a slight decline if we were doing more normative clavicular pec anatomy, which is kind of interesting. And I want you guys to remember that it's not, even if, let's just say, even if it were straight across, when we start going into actual practical chest examples, how traditional barbell bench press as it relates to function and hypertrophy as a primary exercise, just in that context, because I love that exercise, may not be the most efficient option if we're trying to get hypertrophy and the best exercise for helping to produce function, which in my opinion will have two things. They'll have a force vector of the exercise that lines up to the aggregate force vector of the muscle and do the least amount of risk, put the joints in the least amount of risk possible. You guys can already probably see my next slide here. Arrow, boom. And so I find what I just showed you, there's something about it that when I've talked to other trainers about this, something that's kind of a little new. And it's that if we look at, if I take the same force vector and I just draw one of them on here in this scenario, right? So let's just say we're going to take the division of pec, and it's going to be producing force this way down towards the sternum. And heck, if you guys want, we can have one up to clavicular and then having one come down to the sternum, right? If we talk about function of the pectoralis major, there's a few things that come up, right? It's an okay shoulder flexor from a neutral position, not all the way through. At one position, it actually becomes a shoulder extensor, depending on how far we get back, but that's a conversation for another time. You guys could see probably from this image, if I add a little dot, and we look at this thing longitudinally, kind of down the joint axis of the humerus this way, you guys can see if these things produce force, it's going to be a pretty good humeral internal rotator. There's one thing that I think is a really distinct function that I don't hear too many people talk about, and I think bicep and many other muscles, like even teres major and lat to some degree, specific divisions participate in this way. But if you guys think about the rotator cuff muscles, right, we've got the big bad four: supraspinatus, subscapularis, infraspinatus, and teres minor. Those four muscles, like if we look at supraspinatus here, you look at the force vector of this thing, you can see that the arrow they've indicated is kind of pulling in this way, right? So if we were to think about this force vector in which direction and what thing it's good at as it relates to the glenohumeral joint, right? Is this line here, is this force vector, this one line, is this going to be more efficient at compressing this bone into this bone? Or is it going to be better at rotating the arm and actually doing abduction, bringing your arm out to the side? Based off of the trajectory of this muscle at this angle and the line that they've indicated here, based off of the anatomy and how far away it is from the joint axis, it's going to be far better at creating joint compression. And part of the reason of that is that the rotator cuff muscles, one of their main functions, as you guys probably have heard, that it's to help produce stability at the glenohumeral joint, right? They are stability muscles. They do have fine motions they do that they'll describe in physiotherapy programs like internal and external rotation. But these muscles have exceptionally low distance from the joint axis in almost all planes and have incredible opportunity to maintain compression of this joint system right here. And part of the reason for that is, unlike many other of the joints that we have in our body, if you look at the size, you guys look at the size of this ball, right? This golf ball on this golf tee. And this might be a review for you, but this golf tee and this golf ball is enormous compared to the golf tee, which means that if you guys have ever gone golfing, the most frustrating thing that happens to me when I go golfing is when I put a golf ball on a golf tee and it keeps falling off. Part of the reason is for that is that that ball does fit into the concaved, right? The cave, circular, deep hole thing, right? The convex round golf ball side of things fits into the concave side of the glenoid pretty well, but not perfectly. And this is a really unique joint system. We got a few joints in our body like this, but in this particular joint, the muscles play a ridiculously high role in maintaining stability at this joint. If we scoot back to the original, this image right here, the reason why I brought up this anatomy is that the sternoclavicular joint is the only bony attachment of this entire shoulder complex to the rest of the body. The scapula is gliding on the rib cage, not attached to the body. The scapula and the clavicle are attached together, but this joint right here is 100% dependent on the clavicle attached to the sternum. And the most important joint, and I would say that in exercise land because this is the joint that, this is the joint that everybody is really thinking about when they're talking about exercise, is that it is really far away from this little bony attachment. And so when we scoot back ahead and we look at these muscles, right, you can see that the pec here, talking about that same kind of compression thing, this supraspinatus has an incredible opportunity to create joint compression. It is not a super great rotator. If we look at the pec muscle right here, we're going to find as we go deeper into chest press land, which is one of the reasons why I harp on chest press so much is, listen, I mean, I love training chest. I really do. But one of the main functions that it does provide, it is a ridiculously awesome shoulder stabilizer. It is not a fantastic mover. It's a good mover. But if this thing were to be, if we were choosing function based off of what strengths this thing had, like a pros and cons chart, this thing is a ridiculous stabilizer unless someone has even with a massive rib cage. And I'll give you a better example of this as we go forward. But if we think about this here, right, or this here, or this here, right, this conglomerate force vector would do a ridiculously awesome job of maintaining this joint compression right here at the glenohumeral joint. Really awesome job. It also does a really good job, which we don't even have, I don't have a photo of here, which I didn't even think of creating joint compression and stability of many of the costal muscles underneath there, right? So chest is actually, pec major is a really good, decent respiratory muscle. It does have some respiratory function that comes with it, especially on those bottom rib cages. So one of the reasons why I want to say this is that as we get into talking about what you should do with your scapula when you get into pressing, and going back to last week when we talk about putting your hands on stuff for doing presses, you got to remember that this muscle smashes the humerus into the scapula really well. It does have some good movement opportunities, but in kind of normal human society, right, we've got this kind of like this psychosomatic, well, at least, right, there's this kind of idea around having developed pec muscles for some demographics that involves you doing a lot of bench press and other styles of exercises, chest flies, decline flies, dips, incline presses to hypertrophy this muscle. Now, clearly, something about that works. Something about that has worked. But we're going to talk about things that could increase the risk, because the thing that I care way more about, sounding like I'm trying to tell you how I think you should do a bench press, is I care way more about our clients not getting injured, way more about that. And then second, what cool things we can derive and use from pressing exercises to help with anterior shoulder function. Because if we think about this drawing right here, this is getting into the scapulohumeral complex conversation. Right? Your scapula and humerus and clavicle and sternum and everything, all these different pieces that complete the shoulder complex, all have to work in harmony and rhythm. And we've done an entire meeting on this. So I will literally give you the Coles notes of this. And if anyone would like to find this video, it's already in the Microsoft Teams account, and you can be able to find that there for sure. But the idea with the scapulohumeral rhythm is that the scapula is going to move to help to maintain this nice stable position of the humerus. And so if I just want to, I'm going to come back to go through one of these slides again really quickly, right? If you look here, this big muscle here is really good at producing force in here. And if we attach all those other muscles, I won't belabor this point, all these muscles do a great job of creating shoulder compression. Arguably, one of the things that my late mentor used to say is that the scapulohumeral rhythm is trying to modify the scapular position. So when you're loading the shoulder, the humerus is putting the most amount of force through the actual glenoid, thick surface as possible to give you the most structural stability. Right? Because if you guys can see here, if this person has this, 165-degree horizontal abducted position, right? You guys can see that arm, the humerus, the majority of the force of that arm, in most cases, depending on the gravity loading scenario, in this model, we've got this nice magician laying on this bed of nails. If we had the scapula locked down, retracted, and forgetting about all those words, we were forcing a scapular position, because we have some incredible control over our mechanics as humans, that can create some risk at this shoulder joint. This can create an opportunity for one side of the bed of nails, the glenoid, to take more force than the other. And this is one of the reasons I think that there is a tremendous amount of folks getting shoulder injuries when they do exercises. It's not that shoulder exercises lead to injury. I think accidentally, there is too much information out there educating folks as to how to modify their shoulder position to try and increase stability. And in some cases, those words, for example, lock the shoulder blade down to increase stability, to be fair, that's literally happening. But the problem is that some of the lack of stability components of allowing the scapula to move actually increases stability at other joint systems. So if you lock down this scapula and create this really nice congruent position of your scapula to be seated right against your spine and depressed to get more lat activation, more middle trap, more everything, there is more. If we were to measure everything, there would be more stability overall in your joint system because there's less things moving. But the problem is the joint that's taking the most amount of force is the one that's the least stable, which I'll be able to show you more as we get to later examples here. Please, I got the chat up here. If anyone has any questions about that, please let me know. Now, one thing that I think is absolutely beautiful about the scapula, as a quick side note before we get into this fella and talk about his pressing and angles and we get into other force things. And of course, whatever we don't get through today, we'll start off next Wednesday right where we left off, is that the scapula has got a really cool conglomerate of muscles that help to centrify joint motion. And so centrifugation, if you want to think about what that is, it's literally if you grab the two sides of your steering wheel and you turn to the left, you got this axis in the middle of the steering wheel. You're holding the steering wheel with the two hands. And if you're going to turn left, your right hand's going to go up and your left hand's going to go down. And if you're doing that equally, that creates a type of force couple around a circular rotary environment that creates centrifugation at that joint axis. So if you look here, and this is just the first drawing I could find, so I would urge you to look up at others. The upper trap, middle trap, lower trap, and serratus anterior, for example, create this really cool harmony to help centrify joint motion around your scapula. It actually does. All of these muscles, like when you elevate, think of it this way, when you shrug your shoulder up to your neck, all of this is happening. Your upper trap is elevating your shoulder blade. Your middle trap is taking the spine of your scapula and trying to adduct your scapula, retract it. Lower trap is pulling on this root of the scapula. Is that right? No, sorry. The inferior aspect, most proximal aspect, medial aspect of the spine of the scapula, pardon my words there, pulling that down. So it's actually pulling this thing away and trying to abduct the base of the scapula a little. And you have serratus anterior that's actually trying to pull this thing all the way up based off its orientation. So you have this tug of war happening between upper trap and middle trap and lower trap and serratus anterior that holds this thing relatively still, but allows it to rotate and have this really cool centrifugation like your steering wheel. Not trying to blow over this because this page right here could be an entire study group conversation on mechanics and understanding that. But the gist of what I'm trying to share with you is the importance of your scapula moving freely and moving naturally. And if you allow your scapula to move in a controlled / normative scenario for pressing, just from a scapular function perspective, not even on the humerus stuff yet, it's going to allow your scapular muscles to all be in an ideal force production scenario and put your scapula in a safe position. What ends up happening if you force your scapula into any position, I don't care what it is, but any one position, you end up having this co-contraction tug-of-war that happens. If you shrug your shoulder blade up really, really high, you'll notice that it actually has to kind of rotate out and then inwardly rotate as you bring it up. If you try to bring your shoulder blade just straight up and you don't allow it to rotate at all, you're going to have one muscle producing force one direction, another muscle that's trying to produce force But this middle trap or another muscle will try to be creating rotation. And then something like a serratus anterior is going to be trying to do an isometric amount of force. It creates this weird tug of war. It will actually decrease how much contractile availability you have. And I think a much more simplified example of that, before going down this too much, is very simply, if you try to elbow flex and then you flex your bicep with no resistance, hard as you can, you do a contraction and do elbow flexion, right? You'll be able to feel your bicep. However, if you flex your bicep as hard as you can at your side and do elbow flexion, if you check in, your tricep is working and contracting concurrently the exact same amount, because if you voluntarily contract one of those muscles, the other muscle on the opposite antagonistic side of the joint system has to work. Therefore, when you do an internal intention-based contraction, there is always a co-contraction. There always is. And this is one of the reasons why when you do an intention-based contraction bicep curl or any other form of exercise, one of the reasons why you move significantly less resistance. It is a little bit that it's more focused, but the other part is the co-contraction side of things with the tricep. Anyway, conversation for another day. Fun times. Let's talk about Steve. I don't think this is Steve. This is actually from an article that Lee Boyce wrote. And I don't know if this is Lee Boyce. Last time I saw him, he wasn't this shredded, but if it is, that's sick. He's done a great job. And what we're going to do is we're just going to look at this particular image. Now, I'm going to be honest. This is the first image I found when I looked up bench press from a top-down view. There's nothing about this that I'm promoting or saying is wrong. I have no allegiance to this photo, positive or negative in any way. All I want to do is, this guy's muscular enough that we can see some divisions of pec major through his chest here, and we can kind of envision the rest. And we can talk about which direction this thing is good at producing force, and as that relates to his mechanics. Before I draw some force vectors on Stan here, Steve, whatever we're going to call him, B, we'll call him Brandon. We're going to draw force vectors on Brandon. Please, does anyone have any questions? Is there anything that I can add some insight onto before I start drawing some force vectors onto Brandon? All right, I'm going to jump in. Please, if anyone has anything, I know I only waited a few seconds, type something. Say, Brandon, that was bad. Let's redo this. Whatever you want, let's talk about it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try and draw, I'll just say the aggregate force vector. Tell you what I'm going to do, actually. I'm going to do two different sets of lines here. Go green. Okay. So you guys can see here, right here, this line right here for him. This is the most top end of his clavicular pec, right? You guys can see that he's got quite a bit of hypertrophy here. So as far as, I mean, we're looking at his skin, so it's hard to say. If I just follow that line that he's got there, this is the best line we can see for the highest division of his pec major. Now, I can't see anything underneath the bar, but let's say that he has a pretty normative costal pec angle. We'll just put this right here just to make our life a little bit easier. Actually, I can't even do that. Pardon me. 1 second. Sorry, I'm doing this wrong from here. There we go. Good. Okay. So these two lines right here, all I'm trying to show you is based off of the attachment site that we know is that upper 1/3 of his humerus, right? We got this attachment site somewhere around here. We have lines that are all pulling this way. Underneath this green arrow, we've got the bottom division of his pec based off of the hypertrophy we can see. Same thing underneath here. And then we've got this origin that kind of outlines this division here. And you can kind of see with these two groups of lines that I've created, I mean, we're starting to get what looks a little bit like pec anatomy. I'm sorry, you can't see that, Taylor. Gosh.
Okay. I know what you're describing.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. I'll have to fix this for next time. You're getting what looks like more normative looking pec anatomy. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a third set of arrows. And I'm going to try and use a more distinct color. Let's do just what stands out. We'll go pink, right? So if I follow the insertion here and the origin here, this is kind of the best I can do with this clavicular pec. We got the sternal division here following the, and what I'm trying to do, just to be clear, you guys can kind of see like his stretch marks and a little bit of his striations through his chest here. They're not fantastic, but you can kind of see a little bit of it. I'm just following that to help me here. And I'm sure you all know the goal of this is more of a visual thought process exercise, not a specific mathematical example, right? So each one of these 3 arrows here are all kind of giving me an indicator as to which direction pec is contracting based off of all the anatomy we have. Before I go to my next point based off of this, does anyone disagree with the lines that I've drawn? Okay. The reason why I ask that is because I want to make sure there's no confusion around this, because now we're getting into this kind of interesting talking about mechanics kind of thing. Because the angle of Brandon's arm here is actually what a lot of people and myself will recommend when you do a barbell bench press, just trying to respect shoulder mechanics and coming all the way down. But we've got this interesting thing. Give me another color. Hopefully I don't make this too muddy. That if we look at his upper arm as a lever, right? I'm just going to use that faded line. You guys can see that his lever and the direction that the pec is contracting are not really lining up fantastically, right? Because theoretically, and bear with me here and let me know what you think. I'm going to put one arrow on. I'm going to remove it because it's going to take up a lot of space. I don't want you to get cluttered. Is if based off of, if we were trying to get the pec based off of this orientation to contract as efficiently as possible, the path of motion would be in line with this pec. Pec function specific, which is different than the line we're getting right here. Now, the pec is obviously involved, but we've got some interesting forces that the pec is going to be much better at doing. And when we get to the top-down view, it's going to be next week at this current pace. When we get to the top-down view, it'll make a little bit more sense because we will see what pec can do. But from this view, the pec and the direction of the humerus don't really line up. What we do have, if we think about Brown, sure, why not, right? We can see that we've got some lines that are pretty good at this angle to adduct the humerus, right? So the pec at this angle, frontal plane, would be good at adducting the arm. We probably could imagine, that I can't draw super well here, that if given the opportunity, this thing would internally rotate the arm pretty well, not externally rotate. And it does have some opportunity to help pull this arm into horizontal adduction. But can you guys see what I'm talking about is that the angle of this thing does not line up with this muscle in this position super, super well. It's kind of funky. It's kind of funky. And now I'm specifically, again, this is 100% talking about just pec function in this exercise. Now, what's funny enough, I'm going to strip all this anatomy off here. We haven't even talked about another muscle, but if we talk about anterior deltoid, right, you guys can again see the shape of this fella right here. Right? I mean, I was kind of terrible. That was also terrible. We talk about anterior deltoid. Well, we look at the resultant of this thing. It's much more in line with the humerus, and it actually looks like that the anterior deltoid could have a pretty good opportunity to pull this arm back across the body. Same with the bicep here, right? The bicep is doing a pretty good job being directly in line with what we're trying to do of doing this, pulling this arm across our body into adduction. And so I find this to be a really kind of interesting view, right? Because as we can tell, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and chat with you guys. Did that work? Hello? There we are.
Yep, that
right.
worked.
Cool. Hair? I don't know who that is.
It was Liz.
Are you Hair Innovations?
Hair
Okay, sorry, I don't know who.
Innovation?
Yeah, I don't know who that is. Sorry.
No.
So in any event, sorry, someone's trying to get in called Hair Innovations, and I'm not sure what that means. In any event, I wanted you guys just to see that at that, like just specifically a mechanical analysis, if you're at that 45-degree angle, there are divisions of pec that will be efficient at bringing the arm across the body, but it's not super efficient. There are other angles, like perhaps more of a decline style, dip style angle that is much closer to optimizing the pec and chest function. And that angle, anterior deltoid and other anterior shoulder muscles like that have really good force vector opportunities to oppose that. So what we're going to do, we're going to put a pin in this for today. And next week, we're going to double back to this. And when we double back to this, we're going to start talking about the top-down view and starting adding a few other scenarios, because it becomes interesting when we do the top-down view and we start getting into the scapular retraction conversation, how you navigate that conversation, what are some of the mechanical implications, what are some of the joint risks that happen at the glenohumeral joint, and one of the more mechanically safe reasons why we advise not to do it, why power lifters should do it if they're trying to move as much weight as possible, and then we'll get into machines. But everybody, that's it for today. Before we button today up, does anyone have any questions at all? Chris, I like your close-up of your forehead. It's like forehead of security. It's cool.
You're welcome, man. It's better than a better close-up.
I like it. It looks good. So keep in mind, guys, I mean, this is 100% more 100 around pec function and pec optimization. So when we go deeper into this, we're going to talk about hypertrophy strategies, function optimization, and again, what I was calling more functional strength. So things not about how much weight you can move, but how much weight you can move while respecting the function. So fun stuff. I'll see y'all Friday, where we're going to be up here again, and we're going to talk about Anna's plan and actually building out that plan from that profile.
Do you actually need me to on Friday, physically?
No, I won't need you this, but Friday, the next Friday, 100% I'll need you, because we're going to go deep into it.
Okay.
I always need you here, but I don't physically need you here for the actual model stuff. So whatever you like. All right, everybody. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Thanks, Brandon. That was awesome.
Thanks so much.
No problem.